The food service, hospitality, and retail industries are evolving in ways you've never heard of until now. Hosted by global industry technovator Rob Grimes and powered by the IFBTA, Tech Bites is your go-to podcast, putting technology innovation and trends on the menu.
Rob Grimes with Tech Bites, and today I actually have a special guest that I've been having a conversation with for the last 3 months. And we actually met each other a long time ago, but the last 3 months. And I'm really proud to introduce and bring into the conversation Alan Young, who's the Vice President of Industry Solutions, keyword strategy for Infor, who is a industry supporter partner of the IFBTA. So welcome, Alan.
Hey, thanks very much for having me, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it.
So, Alan, I've learned a lot about you in a very short period of time because I know
Probably
we
too
crossed
much.
paths a long time ago.
Yes.
But why don't you share some of your history? Because I learned, first of all, you're not in sales and you're not necessarily in marketing, you're in strategy. But why don't you share two things with us? A little bit, let's talk about your background first, you know, where you came from and what your history looks like. And then we'll talk a little bit about Infor, and then we'll have a conversation on what's going on in the industry.
Perfect. It's probably easiest to start with, I was a high school dropout, kind of. Well, I wasn't a high school dropout, but definitely a college dropout. And that's how I got into hospitality. It's kind of by fluke. My very first job in the hospitality industry was as the minibar guy for Four Seasons hotels in Vancouver. And so I would be running around with a cart, filling people's minibars up, jotting it down in chits, and then punching it into the property management system. So throughout my hotel career, I was predominantly focused on the food and beverage side of the business. And then I got sucked out of there and started working for General Mills Restaurants Canada, where I was the regional manager of many, many Red Lobsters, utilizing a product called Romanco 1600s back in the day. And that was...
I should point out there's a slight accent. He just brought up Romanco. If you don't know, if you were looking for POS in Canada...
Yes.
Which is where you got your career and where you live. You'd know the name Romanco.
That's right. And that was probably in the mid-90s, right? So early 90s, mid-90s. So it was a big deal because it was actually showing table turns and showing average check and all these interesting facts that we really didn't know about. And then obviously then started helping with ordering and recipe management, et cetera. So
what was your position there?
I was in charge. I was the general manager of 4 different units. So 4 stores. So,
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I started off with the GM of the one in Brantford, just outside of Toronto. And then I got more piled onto me. And then so that's how I got into the computerization of our industry. Got sucked back into Four Seasons, worked for them for a while. And then I was asked on a very bad day, which was probably fortuitous. I was asked to go and join Micros to head up the Caribbean for them, to work in Bermuda. And then I moved from Bermuda to the Bahamas. So we were installing Micros 8700s, the new Micros 3500, the property management system that really never worked. But I don't think they planned on a touchscreen property management system to ever really work.
How long ago was that?
That would have been in 93 to 98 in there.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then from there,
That's a tough job. Somebody's got to do it.
Somebody's got to do it. I used to ride my little scooter to work in my tie and jacket and my shorts and my knee socks like everybody else.
There you go.
But then I got really into technology and started working in the technology side of the business. So I really started working with a number of startups, some larger firms. I worked with Infor 13 years ago, left them, started my own firm. And 9 months ago now, I came back to join Infor to help them with their overall strategy and a little bit of messaging and a little bit of marketing, but really what's going to happen in the next 5 years and what do we need to be doing to ensure that we're ahead of it. So that's
okay. And about Infor.
Yeah, Infor is a fairly big company, owned by Koch Industries. I think we have about 19,000 employees, make a whole bunch of money. At the same time, however, I work for a smaller business unit within all of Infor. So I work with Infor Hospitality. So we develop point of sale, property management, revenue management, and sales and events software.
But you also have, I spent 3 days
Yeah,
with your team and some other consultants and analysts in the industry recently in Las Vegas. And I got to tell you, I learned a lot about Infor and some things that, well, first of all, I came to the meeting knowing some things that most of the people in the room didn't know because they were hotel people.
that's right.
And I know that you guys actually do quite a bit in restaurants and food service. I know you do a
Huge.
lot in some very large scale uh, operations, college campuses, a lot of universities,
Yeah.
and arenas and stadiums. I also know that I want to show you I was paying attention, but I actually knew this
Ah,
before. But I also know that um, you do a lot of retail too. And so when you take a look at the big three and you look at the crossover of industries, while you've mentioned hotel, you got your food service background and startup, and then you have retail, and you put those three things together, those industries really work very closely together.
They certainly do. And what's always miffed me in our industry is the travel industry as a whole, which includes restaurants, arenas, stadiums, hotels, obviously, and then airlines. But airlines have always gotten the most amount of kudos. Um, Funnily enough, our industry probably, if you mash them all together, eclipses what the airline industry does en masse. So it's one of those things
On
we
mass in transactions or customer engagement? What are we talking
definitely
about?
in transactions and definitely in customer engagement, no doubt. Right. When you just look at the number of restaurants there are on the planet, the number of hotels there are, and versus the number of airlines and the number of flights.
And
So
everybody's got to eat and sleep, but they don't all have to fly.
exactly,
And
exactly.
then when they
So
do fly, they eat and they sleep.
yeah, that's right. And usually they eat bad and they don't sleep well. So
Well,
uh,
some might argue that. So,
it
okay.
depends upon which carriage you're in. Yes, I hear you. But from our perspective, I don't think our industry gets enough of the kudos from outside. And so when you do marry those three entities up, it's a huge industry. And I've been in it for 43 years, and I don't plan leaving anytime soon. But one of these days.
Well, there are some specialty areas that I think are probably worth discussing your background because as I start to think about Four Seasons, and of course, I've been watching White Lotus that a lot of people don't know, is in Four Seasons, right?
Yeah.
But why did they pick Four Seasons? They pick Four Seasons because they understand the customer connection, they understand guest history, they understand a higher level of service, not necessarily putting technology in front of the customer, and how to work behind the scenes to give better service. But they also so you got loyalty in there, but also revenue management in there. And my guess is with your background, there are stories to be told of what Infor is doing or what you know in those areas that would apply to food service and retail and the other areas.
Oh, sure. Any aspect of service, and I think we're kind of at an unfortunate point in our industry at times, just because of the turnover, the amount of people that are moving back and forth. Service tends to be lacking. It doesn't matter whether you go into a retail outlet or whether you go into a restaurant down the street. Sometimes that service level just isn't up to par. And there's two reasons, in my mind's eye. Technology is still a barrier. We haven't necessarily been able to extricate technology out of the conversation or the relationship build between a server and a guest, or anybody else and a guest for that matter. And then secondarily is people don't necessarily go into our industry as much as they used to. They don't see it as a career. And
As a
that's
career choice.
correct. And that's a huge challenge because it's a fabulous career. Um, and, I think most people get into hospitality as a career through fluke. They start working in a bar or a restaurant or a hotel, and all of a sudden they like it. And if you do your job halfway decent, there's a good chance you're going to go ahead and move up that scale pretty quickly. But when it comes to the changes that we're seeing, airlines brought in revenue management eons ago with Delta, were the first real ones to bring it in. Hotels kind of adopted it later on and said, okay, we're going to do that. But still, overall adoption of revenue management within the hotel ecosystem itself is still rather low. And now we're kind of at a new frontier where there are companies like Juicer and others that are actually helping restaurateurs revenue manage their menu. So just to bring it down to as simple a term, if I have a restaurant that's open from 11 till 11 and my peak times are 12:30 and 6:30, first of all, why shouldn't I go ahead and charge people for my table? If they want to go ahead and reserve a table at peak time, why shouldn't they have to go ahead and pay for that? I think that's a huge revenue stream that the industry is missing.
They should pay for the rental of the table during peak
Correct.
time.
Correct.
Well,
Not
why not just build it? Why not just build it on the menu pricing?
well, I think that the challenge within the menu pricing itself, so I think there's different levels of revenue generation within the restaurant industry that can be attained. One is definitely that reservation. I think people are attuned to, if they have to reserve something, there's value with that reservation, right? And I think carving that out of the decision tree makes sense, because if somebody says, I want a table of 6 at 7 o'clock and it's peak time in the restaurant, sure, I'm going to drop $20 to make sure I get that table no matter what. So I think there is a revenue stream to be had there, and you can revenue manage that based upon time and physical occupancy of the table. Is it a a deuce, a 4 top, an 8 top, or whatever?
Wait, hang on. So we're
Like,
looking at not only the time that they're taking the table, but how long do they spend?
oh, it's definitely for sure.
Well, but wait a minute. So if we're talking about spending, and if I think about, so there are always these deja vu moments that somebody
Yep.
has. A deja vu moment for me, by the way, would be if somebody talks to me about automated kitchen orders. I can tell them Romanco System Seafood Shanty, and I don't even know what year it was in Philadelphia, and it had to be in the early 90s,
Right.
right? But it comes back around, right? So I know that there are restaurants that have tried tiered pricing during different times of the day or demand. I know that reservations, I also know that order taking, depending upon whether it's QSR or pizza, the throttling and
Hmm.
price can be done that way. But I sort of have a hard time thinking about actually having an algorithm that is saying that you're booking at this time, but you're staying too long. Because if I'm really doing my job as a restaurateur, aren't I trying to enhance your meal by selling you more, not as upselling, but pairing the right wine, getting service in an efficient manner so you're not in a hurry to go? And so I don't know where you'd fit that in there. If I sell you wine, I sell you a dessert, I sell you appetizers, and you're not feeling like you're being sold to. Revenue
So
management.
So yes, but I also think that there's a way for you to go ahead and create some guardrails in that. Yes, you want that average check to increase. You want price per guest charge per guest to increase. But at the end of the day, you have to go ahead and factor, and this is where algorithms will work. Is somebody who's going to sit there on a 4 top at a specific time for a specific period of time, are they going to spend more than somebody else? And the more data you have, the more you're able to figure this out. Listen, we live in a data driven world, but we're never, ever going to get this completely right. And the restaurateur themselves has to go ahead and with that gut feel, try to figure out what's best for them. But we
But if
are,
they're not trained and you have turnover and things like that, you got to depend on systems to help you to do that
you
in a
do,
way that people can manage and work, right?
you do. And when it comes to any type of revenue management related to a specific item, I think you'll see that change very, very quickly when we get rid of paper menus. As soon as people, and this is not my generation, but this is the generation that's coming up right now, what's called Generation Alpha. As soon as Generation Alpha gets to be a point where they're spending money, they will have been used to reading books online. They will being taught online, have a communication device as their cell phone as their primary medium for interaction. And so they will not expect a handwritten menu. When they're completely online, then that will let the operators of the restaurants and other types of facilities move their menu charges to prices, more effectively, because it's not sitting there
And they're not
in black and
expecting to
white.
have to scan a QR code either.
Exactly. Very, very
And
true.
boy, did people swear that was going to stay around. Let me
Right.
tell you, I had that discussion during COVID, and there are people that have built their systems on QR codes, but they don't. But the real question is, how do you connect from Gen Alpha and the next generation all the way up to, the sixth generations there? How do you connect them all at different levels that they're actually part of your ecosystem when they're in or when they're out? How do you collect them and bring loyalty, into the mix as well?
Well, I go back to the most simple aspect of loyalty, and that's if you deliver amazing service, you're going to have loyal guests. Easy. That's not the most difficult piece. However, there are different ways to go ahead and help increase that level of loyalty if certain aspects are also missing, and that's through programs, etc. There are also companies now doing immediate gratification loyalty, where if you become a loyal individual of someone's brand, then rather than waiting for points to accrue, if you book that table for four, maybe everybody gets like free desserts, right?
I have always said that people want immediate recognition, immediate gratification.
Right.
If you travel a lot, we had this conversation before we went on the air here.
Yep.
If you travel a lot, you can't use all these points. And you want somebody to recognize you and upgrade you because you're loyal, or to in Four Seasons case, or Ritz Carlton, or Mandarin, or Peninsula, they all know what kind of fruit you have in your room when you're there, and what you ate, and
Right.
they don't have to ask you about it. They observe and they give better service. So there seems to be a disconnect between service, as you're pointing out. So I tell you what, let's just take a break for a second, and then I want to talk strategy with you, because I think we need to hone in on some of these things you just said.
Sure.
So we'll be right back with Alan Young, who's the VP of Industry Solutions and Strategy for Infor, an industry partner of the IFBTA. We'll be right back.
With the rapid expansion of technology in the food and beverage industries, finding the right supplier can become overwhelming and complicated. To simplify this process, the IFBTA created Exchange. Exchange is a powerful search tool where users can easily narrow down their technology search and refine results by application type, geography served, department, and more. Browse resources and learn more about the industry's technology suppliers at exchange.ifbta.org. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back. And I'm in the middle of I think we're about to have a strategy conversation. We're going to switch to strategy with Alan Young, the VP of Industry Solutions and Strategy for Infor, a industry supporter partner of the IFBTA. So before we took the break, we were talking about, I was asking a question, which I didn't let you answer, which has to do with, how do we, in your role as strategy too, not only predicting the future, looking at the past, having those deja vu moments, knowing that we have a labor problem, knowing that, as you put it, service is part of the equation in managing revenue that can be applied in the restaurant industry, just like in hotels. So what are the key points that you are looking at right now for Infor and also in the industry that you believe will help us to bridge that gap?
Well, I think the easiest way is to extricate technology out of the equation. If you look at department stores, or if you look at retail outlets that are fairly high traffic, a lot of the way that those retail outlets are ran, yes, there's a point of sale system at the end of the queue, so to speak. But before you get into that queue, everybody's talking to everybody else saying, I need this size, I need this. I've got a person over here that's looking to try on this jacket. And they're constantly communicating. Where the next level of communication will be AI-driven communication based upon prompts. So if
it took us 18 minutes to bring up the word AI.
Well,
good. Let's keep going.
Let's keep going. So AI is probably too big of a term, but it's going to be going ahead and prompting people on what to do. So rather than a service-oriented individual being handcuffed by the technology that surrounds them, or conversely, just not looking at the individual while they're punching in an order, now we're going to let people just go ahead and converse with individuals. And the context of that discussion will be pulled out, and then it'll be read back to the individual and say, this is the order I believe you need. And you go, yes, that's the one. Please trigger the order. So I really believe that we need to get to a point with technology where people that are service oriented, we let them do that. And the ones that are not, we go ahead and give them the proper schooling and then cue them on what to do. So I was on a call last week with a group of people that put together a syllabus for the local university here. And there was a hotelier, there was a restaurant, there was a ski hill, and there was a banquet hall, and myself and some other professors. And they were all talking about all this cool stuff that we're putting together, part of the syllabus is, but they were saying the most important thing for my business is I want people who understand what delivering service means. And so if that person goes into their first job or second job and the first bit of training they get invariably is here's the point of sale terminal, here's how you punch in an order, here's the property management, here's how you check in a guest. If that's the first point of orientation, we've lost the mark. The first
Well, there's
point of
so many touch points, right? But
exactly.
the thought that comes to mind, and maybe we were joking about this in the first half about everybody's got to eat and sleep. Um, you know, why don't why doesn't the labor that service us understand that they should be providing the service that they expect? Because if you turn the tables on them and you said, "Hey, when you go to this restaurant, what do you think a good service experience would be?" and then you try to marry that with maybe what they're delivering, there's a break there.
There's a huge break. And it's unfortunate. I think that's from a management level down. There are a lot of people that are looking at KPIs as the main driver for their business and kind of missing sight of what's really granular and what's important to their business, which is enabling people to fully understand how bloody important that service element is. And so if we build products or develop software that enable people to be better at their jobs and smarter and give them a chance to be themselves within that engagement between them and the guest, then we've done our job as a software company. I think we're still challenged because the bigger companies, the larger hotels, the bigger restaurant chains, the bigger venues, they want to go ahead and get all of this information. And by trying to aggregate all of this information, it can be very challenging. So we need to simplify that out. And in order to simplify that, then we can simplify the front end. And hopefully that service element gets increased.
So the term I hear used this year, besides personalization, which is used quite a bit now, it's really, by the way, not so much AI, but it's more like
No.
personalization. I hear a lot, which I could boil that down to service, in there, and then the other is frictionless, which
Mm-hmm.
is the ability to have it seamlessly happen without worrying whether it's AI or whatever it is. But also frictionless to me is both the labor, the staff, the management, but it's the customer.
Yep.
And how do you engage them all? So where do you see, the next 2 to 3 years going, to make it frictionless? Because as you've already pointed out, if the first experience is at the point of sale, it's a little bit late, for delivering customer service. So how do you eliminate those bottlenecks, or how do you start it much earlier?
Well, I think when we've tried with some degree of awareness to go ahead and connect with people prior to their arrival, whether it's at a restaurant or whether it's at a hotel. Whether you make a booking online and then it's like, Alan, your booking's coming up in 24 hours. And mostly it's just a notification that says, hey, Alan, your booking's coming up in 24 hours. It doesn't say your booking's coming up in 24 hours. And on our specials menu, we're going to have A, B, C, D, E. Oh, and I know the last time you were here, you loved the Bordeaux. So here are some different Bordeaux's we have in stock.
Interesting, by the way, that we pointed out that perhaps the airline industry is not always right up there in food service. And the one thing that they do is I do get a notification of, we have the following menu items on your flight coming up, and make your choice. Now, that might be where I'm sitting, but that really doesn't matter. The concept is that they do that. I can't think of a single restaurant I don't think of any hotels that do that
No.
either. Not a cruise ship. No one. I mean, maybe you know it, but I can't think of anybody that applies that simple thing of saying to somebody, you're coming in and here's what we have going on in advance. The only place I can figure out that they know that in advance is in prisons or someplace where they have cyclable menus, or school systems,
Right.
right?
Right.
I point out prisons because if you run out of food, you have a riot if you
Yes.
don't have what they expected that day. But why aren't we employing those kinds of technologies into start with the guest ahead of time, getting them excited about their visit. We don't want them to order in advance, but maybe point out something that's going to be special about their visit coming up that's not every other night, so they're anticipating it.
Well, I think you brought up the term personalization, and we look at personalization as being reactive, right? We're sitting here waiting for somebody to tell us what they like, and then we react upon that. And that's kind of how it's been. But with true personalization, you need to be proactive. You need to reach out to somebody and say, here's what we've got. What would you like? Rather than the other way around, which we've always been, Alan likes a high floor away from the elevator. And so we'll stick him on a low floor near
Right.
the elevator, which invariably happens. So with that in mind, I think we do have that engagement somewhat reversed at times. It really depends upon the workflow of the restaurant or the property or the venue itself. But at the same time, people need to be doing testing. And we don't test in our industry. We go ahead and we build out a menu and we write it, and we 3-4 months down the track and go, those 3 things aren't selling well.
They don't test. What they do is they build out the menu, and they're only looking at, even if you simplify it to the star, plow, horse, dog, the real simple stuff, they're only looking at the menu, what the menu costs. Maybe occasionally they look at the time to prepare or the additional things that are involved. But they always look at the menu mix and say, if I put this on here and this has this profitability, what does it do to the rest?
Right.
But that's just static stuff. They're really not, doing the other part that you're talking about.
Yeah, and with that in mind, you can test to see what's going to work, right? We do it on websites all the time. You do A/B testing. You put something up there in one image of the website, and the next time the image refreshes, somebody else gets something else, and you see which works best. We don't necessarily do that with how we interact with people, especially in a digital environment. So we have the capability to do really cool things to our guest prior to arrival that says, here's what's going on. Here are the wines. Here's the entertainment. Maybe there's somebody new. It could be a multitude of anything. But I think the best way in this day and age is to test and to see what works best for your establishment.
So are we talking theoretical here, or are we talking something that you actually look? I mean, you have the fortune of being in a company that is very heavy into hotels. You're into the restaurant. You're into all these different areas, so you're able to share information. Is this theoretical, or is this something that exists but needs to be put into practice?
No, these are things that actually exist but need to be put into practice for sure. There are marketing tools out there everywhere that you can start going ahead and putting this stuff into practice very, very quickly. And then the back end systems, the what I call primary systems, the point of sale, the property system, those kind of things can react upon it almost immediately based upon the referenceability or actually the responses that you get back. So what not everything works for everyone. We get that. But at the same time, people tend to go to your restaurant because it's a specific type of restaurant. If it's a road style restaurant, people are looking for that environment. If it's fine dining, they're looking for that. If it's ultra fine, they're looking for that. So you can buy data, not specific to your physical restaurant, but by industry data, figure out what people like where. And so by doing this, you can go ahead and start layering in all of this knowledge into the practices that you're running your business with. And what's really interesting in today's technology void, so to speak, it is that data. So by implementing proper data practices and looking at the information more effectively, not just how much have I sold or how much less do I need to go ahead and place an investment in this area. Now looking at how people are buying, how people are eating, how long they're staying, what do they like, what don't they like, and then using aggregated like large data sets to go ahead and fuel that smaller.
But whose responsibility is that? Because you just said, go ahead.
It's our responsibility.
Meaning the suppliers.
Yes, it's our responsibility.
Yeah, because you said you can go buy that data, but you also are the ones who can translate that data, which may come from sources that are not in the industry, right?
For sure.
So there's no way that any operator or a management company or whatever, maybe the big brands can figure out, but I would say that they may not be able to figure that out either. So it becomes your responsibility. So putting you on
Right.
the spot on that, how do you do that?
So here's a hypothetical for you, kind of a hypothetical. So there's Yelp review data all over the place, right? And being able to go ahead and aggregate that review data for your specific restaurant to say, okay, let's semantically analyze this data. Let's see what people are actually saying. Are they saying they like the onion soup, or are they saying the onion soup is too salty? How much does that occur? And by taking all of this information and putting into an environment that you can query that and go, hey, listen, I want to go ahead and ask out of everything. I want to see how people are relating to my onion soup. And by pulling in different information, yes, you pull from that primary system, the point of sale that shows you the sales. Maybe you'll pull from recipe management to see what kind of the recipe looks like for onion soup. But then you can pull all of this great data that's sitting out in Yelp and bring it in and start using that all together to make the decisions on how to build out a better menu and how to make sure you're reacting to the
It's
people that
listening to
need
your
it.
digital customer.
Correct.
I mean, because that's where they're commenting is digitally. You can't hack their email. I guess you can't hack their Facebook page.
Can't do
But,
none of
well,
that.
a lot of people post stuff on Facebook that they make public, right?
Yep.
You certainly can look at LinkedIn and as you say, Yelp. I think a lot of people only go to one or two sources, the obvious ones, but there's so many other sources that if you can aggregate and listen to that data, and then do some analysis on it, including being able to separate out people, create the profiles, that probably helps you out.
Yeah, and we were in Vegas together about a month ago. It feels like now. Was it probably less time than that? But when we were there was a citywide, and that citywide was the World of Concrete event, right? So here's a
Yep.
whole bunch of people that come in building stuff, build concrete, rebar people. It's huge, right? But can you imagine if I was a five-star restaurant in one of those casinos, and I know that the world of concrete is in, and the world of concrete guys aren't looking for vichyssoise. They want something a little meatier. So why wouldn't I change my menu up during that conference, that citywide, to say, here's what I'm going to offer the people that are in town that week? That's how flexible we need to be too, is to understand what's going on in our own backyard.
People have tried automating the Red Book over time, and where you would put it rained, we had a convention in
Right.
town, but again, that's historical data trying to be applied to what you think is going to be in the future. What's missing from that kind of data is, what is the real sentiment and what's actually going on today, and what are people feeling about today looking forward, not looking at what happened last year, because there's a lot of things that happened between last year and this year.
No,
Same
and
conference, but the taste styles of those people change, and there's probably a number of places to get it.
yeah, and maybe they're coming from different places as well, right? And so yeah, there are so many variables. Historical data got blown out of the water with COVID. And so what we did is we went pre-COVID to give us historical data. And that doesn't work because, my God, haven't people changed their minds about most everything since COVID? So from that perspective, we've got to look at actionable data that's kind of super near term. And the easiest way to get that information is from as many different sources of information as you can. So when we talk to a client of ours that's trying to understand their business more effectively, we're saying, okay, let's look at the other sources of data that are going to impact your business, not just the primary sources. And so that's hugely important.
So it's a very interesting conversation, because I do know something about your background, and you pointed out, actually very similar to me, that you started in restaurants and then you
Yeah.
ended up in tech. So it's the same sort of thing. But just getting before we wrap up, just sort of tying this together a little bit with Infor. I did the talking and said all the areas that I'm aware that Infor is involved in. But now that you've come back and you're in a role, and I'm sure it's changed since 9 years ago or whenever it was that you
Yeah.
were there before, what are the main areas that you believe that experience is coming in within the Infor toolkit that you are able to take and set a strategy for food service or hospitality
Well, I
in a
think,
lot of different areas?
yeah, when you look at our food service group, which is run by an amazing gentleman, there, we're in higher education, we're in huge theme parks, we're in massive arenas and stadiums doing a myriad of different things. So what's really important is the growth of our sales and events solution and how that's really going to impact the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
To your point of, are we going to be able to personalize events? And are we going to be able to revenue manage of groups where we haven't been
Right.
previously? And so I see that growth as being quite interesting. People's, even though we keep on saying that the economy is in a downturn or somewhat static, we still see people spending oodles of money on their experiences, whether it's airline, hotels, restaurants, etc., or live events are huge. So we believe that a strategy associated with technology and its applicability to live events and to that marketplace, the conferences marketplace, is a really interesting market for us. And we see the food service industry still clipping on, and some of our clients, our larger clients, are opening up hundreds and hundreds of stores.
Right. And
So
you're also international.
very much so, very much
So
so.
you have an international piece. The thought that comes to mind is, and I'm going to try to remember this, that you've pointed out to us that one of the challenges is not actually testing things, and I get that, but it would seem to me of all of the companies out there, and you've got the experience with other vendors as well, you're in a rather unique area because the customers that are being served by the people who are buying your systems is such a diverse group, from colleges to healthcare to stadiums and arenas, that if you have all that data and you're behind the scenes collecting the data from the outside sources on those groups, even when the world of cement is in, or concrete is in Las Vegas, and you
Yep.
have systems in Las Vegas, right? That you actually have a better view on how to test, to help somebody to test with some of the data and things that you have.
Oh, for sure. We can definitely see
You have
preferences
the
on what's
customer
going
base.
on. We have the customer base. We also have to be very careful. Everybody's data is their own, clients as well. So we've got to make sure that that's something that's utilized properly. But at the same time, we do have referenceable information that we can
But
go
I would
ahead
think,
and
as a
say,
strategy person, because you got the title strategy here, that you have a very unique view, even if you're not sharing people's data, of where the industry is headed, where the consumer is headed, and then where the gaps are. Even if you sit at a table with your peers from the other industries, I think you're in a rather unique situation. Is there two or three things that you could share with us, before we wrap up, that maybe we should be thinking about in the future from your observations and what you see within your company
yeah. So first of all, I'm super lucky to be where I am, 100%.
in Canada?
Well, not only in Canada, but also within
Okay,
Infor.
sorry.
But I think when you look at what's ahead, the utilization of mobile is going to be even more important than we see it today, and also the utilization of what we call agentic AI, which is a way for people to communicate with their systems and for their systems to communicate back with them, and that's primarily a
That is a
mobile
key
device.
word of this year. It used to be generative. It's agentic. Got it.
It's agentic. So that's number one. Number two is just knowing what the hell you have. Because so many companies don't know what they have already within the information that they hold dear to themselves. So start tweezing out that information and start making decisions based upon that. I think is super important for companies to really, really hone in on what do they want to do. And it needs to be part of their strategy as well. You might have a large restaurant company over here and another one over here that their strategies are diametrically different. So they need to look at the information differently. And then thirdly, I think globalization is going to be hugely key. We look at travelers going back and forth between continents and between countries. But when you look at inbound travel to the US and Canada or outbound travel to Europe and APAC, we're getting to a point now where it's almost one global footprint unto itself,
Absolutely.
where we really have to start
And the
understanding.
expectations of service, because they're being educated in other places. It's sort of
For
like the
sure.
limitations of even loyalty systems and, not being, or gift cards, but not being used. People have a standard expectation of service globally now because they all travel.
Agreed. So those are probably the three areas that I would say is agentic AI, know your data, and make sure that you make yourself available to every single person on the planet.
And I add in there, well, personalization will help do that. And I add in the word frictionless in there too and make sure it's seamless and it works well. Well,
It's got to work.
It's great having the conversation with you. It's been great spending, I think, 3 or 4 times together in the last 3 months, let's say. And I certainly look forward to doing that again. But it's been a pleasure. I'd love to. I know we're going to continue to have this conversation.
For sure. We will continue undoubtedly, and it'll grow. For sure.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me on the Tech Bites podcast of the IFBTA. And it's been a pleasure to have a conversation with Alan Young, the VP of Industry Solutions and Strategy for Infor, a industry supporter partner of the IFBTA. And we'll look forward to continuing this conversation on the podcast and also in the industry and many of the events coming up. So, Alan, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Rob. We appreciate it. And we're proud to be a sponsor of IFBTA.
This podcast is brought to you by the International Food and Beverage Technology Association. The IFBTA is the industry's voice of food service, hospitality, and retail technology, providing thought leadership as your single, impartial, and go-to resource. The IFBTA offers in-person and online communities to connect with your peers, the exchange, an all-encompassing global technology resource, and an industry-wide professional education and certification program. The bottom line is the IFBTA is your place to gather, learn, and share in conversations like the one we're having today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Tech Bites, powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host, and I look forward to taking our next bite of technology together.